Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Literati Book Club members and anyone else who's dropping in. This is a really exciting opportunity and an occasion that I'm really thrilled about. I'm introducing you to the wonderful Jesmyn Ward, whose book, Salvage the Bones, we just finished in the book club. She's joining us from DeLisle, Mississippi, her hometown. And she is right now in the midst of an interesting project, which is editing Best American Short Stories. So we'll soon get to see what she considers the best short stories of the last year. And what she published most recently is a book called Navigate Your Stars, based on a commencement address she gave. And we're, of course, hoping that there will be a novel soon thereafter. No pressure.
I'm working on one. I am in the home stretch of my first rough draft. So I'm around 60 pages, maybe 70 pages away from the end.
Wow.
Yes.
That's exciting.
It is exciting.
So just to begin with something very, very simple, which is if you can give us I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. Just a little bit of a thumbnail of your experience growing up and becoming a writer, and what that path was like for you.
So of course, like I think most writers, I was a big reader first. When I was a kid.
Yeah.
As soon as I learned how to read, it was something that I loved. But when I was very young, I always thought, like, I loved reading so much and I loved books so much that it always seemed to me that what writers accomplished, like writing a book, was some sort of it was magic, right? And I didn't know whether or not I'd be capable of that kind of magic. So I think I was a reader for a long time. And then when I was in like middle school, I think I started writing poetry first. And then people responded like pretty positively to my poetry. And then I think that made me begin to think that maybe, creative writing was something that I could do. And maybe I could, maybe I was capable of that sort of the magic that I admired. But it wasn't until I actually, graduated from college, finished my undergraduate degree, that I committed to writing and really, I think, embraced wanting to be a creative writer and embraced, storytelling and thinking about like what that meant for me and whether or not I was going to attempt to write short stories or novels. And unfortunately, it was actually like a tragedy that it took a tragedy for me to get to that point to where like I actually embraced writing. When I graduated from college, I was like 23, and my brother died. He was hit by a drunk driver, and he was 19. But that losing him that way totally changed my outlook on life and what I thought was important, and all of those pressures that I had felt before, to do something practical with my degree, which, I mean, those are totally legitimate concerns, especially in the part of my family, people in my family, my community, because I'm a first generation college kid, and my background, I grew up really poor. I come from a poor / working class community. So those were all legitimate concerns, right? My mom wanted to do something practical, like be a lawyer or go into the medical field. But then losing my brother in that way, I think it made me think differently about life and about death. And I thought one day I thought that I owed it to myself to try to do this thing that I was in love with, and I owed it to myself to try and give myself a chance to succeed, right? And and if I failed, then I could go back to school later in life and I could do one of those practical things. But I just felt that it was important for me because I love storytelling and because I'm so inspired by people, like the people that I grew up with, people in my community, people who could, my people, who I grew up with, who are in my family. And just like, I think the people of this region that, I don't know, that I just, that I felt like that was worth attempting, sort of following that inspiration and seeing where it led me. But then, of course, that was the beginning, right? Because I didn't know what I was doing at all. And so I guess I began my education as a writer then. I began to read very widely, attempted to figure out what I liked and what I read and what I disliked. And then I attempted to imitate what I liked and avoid what I didn't like.
Can I interrupt and ask a little bit about what that was? I mean, what was the work that really inspired you and that you emulated?
Okay. Let's see. So I found myself reading a lot of writers of color, and also Southern writers. I guess perhaps I was drawn to reading work by writers who I felt like might be able to teach me something about how to write about this place, so that's in my early 20s. It's when I first seriously read William Faulkner, seriously began reading, read Alice Walker, was also reading at the same, Toni Morrison, of course, was also reading poets. So poets and also and now of course I'm blanking, right?
Yeah.
Poets like Lee Young Lee. I remember loving his work when I was in my early 20s because and part of the reason I think that I loved his work so much is because I felt like poets show you what language is what is possible in language. I feel like they always like remind you of what is possible in language and how just a phrase, just a 4 words, put together can open a door for you or make you see the world in a completely different way. So yes, I read lots of poets, and I don't know. That's when I discovered James Baldwin's work, and he was influential for me as far as creative nonfiction went. So I don't know. I was attempting to just read as much as I can because I realized, even though I majored in English when I was, in college, and I'd always been a big reader, there was so much that I hadn't read or that I hadn't attempted to read as a writer. It's like paying attention to what is happening and how a writer is accomplishing something. So,
yeah, and reading it almost forensically.
Yes.
To learn from it,
yes.
As much as to enjoy it.
Yep, exactly.
And did you always feel that your writing would be place-based? I mean, sounds like the community and your roots there are really important.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because even in so once I wrote a bit in high school. That in high school was when I first began writing short stories, but those short stories had nothing to do with where I'm from, or none of them were set in Mississippi. None of them even like, people of color, Black people were not the main characters in these stories at all.
No, you're kidding.
What they were like fantasy stories. Like I was very into fantasy as a teenager. So they're like fantasy stories. Like they were just totally, just totally detached from anything having to do, like with the reality, of the reality that I was living in and the reality that I saw around me. And then I went away to college. I went to school in California, and I think going away for school then something about leaving made me look back homeward, and sort of and realize that, I don't know, like realize, I think, how important storytelling was to, like, in my life and in my childhood, and I don't know, like in my family. I mean, I have a pretty big, immediate family and a huge extended family. And so, we'd always, people, like, we would have these big parties. And when we would have these parties, like, part of the party was sitting around with each other. And like, as kids, I mean, we were kids, we didn't talk much, but we would like listen to stories that, that the older folk would tell. So like my grandmother was a great storyteller.
Wow.
So she's like the first storyteller, that I remember. But she'd tell stories about anything, about her life when she was growing up, or about other friends of hers, like in the neighborhood and in the community. And so I don't know, I think leaving and being very homesick, and like that made me think about home a lot, and think about the place that the importance of storytelling in my life. And then realize that there were lots of stories in the place where I was from that I never saw, or that I didn't see really in the literature that I read. And so I think that inspired me to begin, like, to look at the place where I'd grown up, and to begin to try to find those stories and tell those stories. It was a long time before I felt like I don't know, like I was doing it not well, but sort of okay. Like I was sort of okay at it. It just took me a long time to, I don't know, to like become comfortable with like the short story form. And then it took a long time to get to that point where I thought, okay, maybe I could write a novel. And I think
you started with short stories.
Yeah, I started with short stories first, which I was not very good at. and I feel like even now, I feel like short stories the form does not come easily to me. Like I really struggle with it, and it doesn't come easily to me. I feel much more comfortable in the novel than I do writing short stories.
Well, something about the unfolding of your stories feels like it wants a certain amount of space, and a short story is so there. I think they seem harder. I mean, I think writing a novel would be nearly inconceivable to me, but writing a short story seems really difficult.
Yes.
And just a very, just almost a kind of haiku, that seems very tricky.
Definitely.
And as you began, you wrote, or began feeling your way to writing a novel. What are the origins of this book? What elements were there for the story for you?
What's funny is that so Salvage the Bones is not my first novel. It's actually my second novel. And I was nearing the end of a rough draft of my first novel when I discovered some of the main characters in Salvage the Bones in a writing exercise that I was doing in an imitations class. So in this imitations class, we had to read some really great writers, like Ford Madox Ford, Virginia Woolf, Ernest Hemingway, Faulkner, Malcolm Lowry, right? And then we had to attempt, in these little short writing exercises, every week we would attempt to imitate like the hallmarks of their writing style, their prose style, right? And so I remember, like, during the week that we were reading Faulkner. And so we read As I Lay Dying, and then we had to attempt to imitate his style, right? So, very long sentences and paying attention to like the rhythm, his specific rhythm of his prose. And I was like casting about for ideas, because I had to do this writing exercise. And I just saw Big Henry and Skeeta in the middle of the street in Bois Sauvage, and they had their dogs, and they were about to fight their dogs. And so that's what I did for that writing exercise. And it did not succeed. It's like a good imitation, but it introduced the world of those characters to me. And so, and there was something about those characters, like I wanted to continue on with them. Like I wanted to figure out, I wanted to follow them back into that world and sort of see what their world was like, and who, the other people were in that world, that inhabited that world with them. And so I thought, well, I'm finishing up this, first novel. And of course I have a ton of revision to do to it, but it would be nice if I already had an idea for my next novel sort of in my head. And I thought about those characters, but I couldn't figure out, like, there was no story to them yet. There wasn't a story. They weren't in a story yet. But then one day, Esh's character just popped into my head. And she was this girl, from the beginning, she was a girl who grew up in a world of men. Like, I was like, what would it be like for this girl who is surrounded by boys and is surrounded by men, and who doesn't really have sort of a network of women who would help her figure out like what it means to live as a, to be a woman, and to be a girl, like in this world. So what would that be like for this girl? And so then, because I knew that she was surrounded by men, that there was her dad and she had multiple brothers, there was just something about, it's like they were magnets, and once I discovered Esh, and there was the story, right, that this book would be about a girl trying to figure out, how to survive in this world, where she has been deprived, of her mother and of women in her family. And then here, Skeeta exists, and then they just came together like magnets. And I thought, oh, well, Skeeta's her brother, and then China's his dog, and then, Big Henry is their friend. And then I began to sort of fill the family in. And then when I actually sat down to begin writing the book, that's when I figured out that at some point in the book, like, they would face Hurricane Katrina. And I feel like it's only natural that if Hurricane Katrina occurs in a book, then it has to, I don't know, it just seemed to make sense that it would occur towards like the climax.
Right.
So.
Right. Gives you a pretty dramatic arc.
Yeah.
So you were constructing the characters after Katrina. This was, so yes. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
So they came to life independently of that. That sounds like those things came together somewhat separately as part of the story.
Yeah. No, they had, so Skeeta and Big Henry had been with me since before Hurricane Katrina, right? And then Hurricane Katrina occurred. And they were still there, just sort of like knocking around in the back of my head, but I didn't really do anything with them. And I actually didn't write for 2 years after. I was home for Hurricane Katrina. And I live on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. I live like 60 miles away from New Orleans, very near Pasquistan, so like the eye of the hurricane was around, I don't know, 15 miles to the west of where I am. And so it was a super traumatic experience. And it actually meant, and I think I was like so traumatized by the experience of that storm, like living through that storm, and then seeing what the fallout that occurred after the storm, that I didn't write anything new for 2 years after Hurricane Katrina occurred. So I didn't start working on that novel. You know, I didn't start working on that novel until like 2 years after Hurricane Katrina passed. And then I
oh,
sat
wow.
like, maybe now I'm ready to I don't know, to like live that experience again and like filter that experience through someone else's, embody that experience, I guess, through someone else's story.
Right. And what was that like? I mean, I'm sure that going through something traumatic like that, you don't necessarily crave reimagining it in such detail.
Mm-hmm. It was rough. Like I did not expect it to be that difficult. I think that a lot of people down here, I mean, not just me, but I think that a lot of people down here, especially on the Gulf Coast and on the Gulf Coast, Mississippi Gulf Coast, and especially, you know, like in New Orleans, probably have a lot of unexamined and trauma, you know, around Hurricane Katrina. And so, and I definitely did, you know, because for one, it made me not write for 2 years. And then, you know, when I it took me around a year and a half, maybe, to write the rough draft of Salvage the Bones. And when I got to the end, you know, to the 10th chapter and the 11th chapter and 12th chapter, the 10th chapter is the lead up to the storm, and then the 11th chapter is the storm, and then the 12th chapter is the aftermath. It was I think I was unprepared for how difficult it was to sit in that place in my imagination, to really embody Ish, you know, and allow her to, you know, to experience that, like be the vessel for her and her family, right? Who, you know, who I loved, you know, as I wrote the book, I always loved my characters, right? And so, and I think it's only natural sometimes for writers to feel protective of them. Like I think that I love my characters so much that I don't want bad things to happen to them. And something that I learned in the writing of Salvage the Bones, like before and then in the writing of Salvage the Bones, pretty quickly, was that I couldn't soften the narrative, you know, like and to do so, you know, to spare them, to try to, you know, act like the like narrative God and spare them, that would be dishonest, right? Because it would not be true to my lived experience, you know, to my family's lived experience, to the lived experiences of the people in my community, the people in this region, you know, who survived Hurricane Katrina. And so it was rough. Like writing those chapters was rough. Like I was very stressed. I did not eat as much. You know, my writing, the kind of writing that I do, is like very invested in really rendering the world fully for the reader, and allowing the reader to really sink into the experience. And I feel like I felt a real sense of not fear. I mean, because I don't know if fear is the right word, but just a real sense of dread, you know, because I knew, like, in the writing of that experience, what these characters were going to, what they were going to experience and what they were going to live through. And I knew that storm was, you know, was going to break them in some ways. You know, and that's not easy to write, I think, especially when you care about, you know, not only the characters that you're writing about, but also, I guess, like the real life people, you know, who are not models for your characters, but who inspire your characters, right?
Right. It's not like, it's not as if you're inventing this hardship out of your imagination.
Exactly.
It was a real experience.
Exactly.
And you know, it's interesting because a lot of the readers in the group were, I mean, it's intense, it's hard, and there are parts of the book where I know some people were very sensitive about the dog fighting, about the frankness of the hard parts. And it's interesting because I haven't thought about it until right now to realize that it's hard to write the hard parts just as it is hard to read the hard parts.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I think it's funny because I feel like that response to my work is something that I encounter a lot, you know, because I know because I write about difficult subjects, you know. I mean there's a fair amount of trauma, you know, that the characters, the people who I write about, you know, that they go through, right? But again, like I feel a responsibility to write honestly about these things and to include them in my work, because that is that, you know, trauma, and but also at the same time, like the you know, like the joy that exists at the same time, the love that exists at the same time, that sense of community that exists at the same time, that sense of like hope in the struggle that exists at the same time. Like all of that is true of the place where I'm from, of the kind of, you know, people who I live with now, who I grew up with, you know, who are part of like of my family. And so I don't know, like my hope, I the last thing that I want to do in my work is like terrorize people, and to leave them with a sense of hopelessness.
Right.
That is not what I want to do in my work. You know, like I want to be honest about you know, about these sort of difficult experiences, but at the same time, like I hope that that the reader feels a sense of redemption at the end of my work, and that they also feel a sense of hope.
Well, I think one thing that's really interesting is that I think for me as a reader, with your work, I am uplifted by the ability for there to be art made from the harsh facts of life, and that there's something profoundly uplifting to think, well, there is this creative process that happens, it's human, that lets us look at hard things, and not to dress them up with beautiful language, but to see the kind of life force that illuminates them.
Yeah.
And that's uplifting. I mean, the sad, I mean, I think it's very possible to be at the same time sad and broken by viewing some of the hardship, but reminded repeatedly that there is something in the human spirit that can overcome. Definitely. Or that prevails and persists. And, you know, I guess I think of the Faulkner Nobel Prize speech all the time in that context, of just, there's something that we and Esh to me is that character who you feel at the end some sense that she will be protected by some power of her character and intelligence and tenderness.
Yeah. And which is, I think, exactly what I was attempting to communicate, you know, and attempting to, I think, show the reader in the story, right? I mean, because it was very important for me that like to write that story from the first person perspective, right? To let her speak for herself and tell her own story, and to, you know, sort of show the reader, I don't know, just to take on voice, right? And to have a sort of just like the baseline agency is that she gets to tell her story, right? Especially because this is a character who always has, or this is the type of person who always has stories told about them, right? But really
Right.
never gets the opportunity to tell her own story, right? I mean, she's this poor, pregnant 15-year-old girl, right? Black girl who, I mean, girls like her they're never allowed to speak for themselves and to, to exercise just that agency, I feel like. And so like it was important for me for that she is able to do that. And also I think like through the telling of that story, as you see, right, that that these characters, they are going to be able to sort of salvage, right, this is so corny, but they are going to be able to like salvage the the bones of their experience, and and not only survive, but I think in the end they will thrive. Like maybe maybe the way that they thrive does not, does not align with, I don't know what most people, with what some people might think of, as what it means to thrive, right? I mean, but I think that they will not only survive, but they will thrive because because they have each other, because there's a sense of community between them, because of
Right.
the strength of their relationships, of not, their family relationships, relationships between the siblings, that the support that they have, with the different members of their community. Like, I don't know, I think that that as you're saying, like that does, I think, uplift the story and uplift,
Yeah.
hopefully, like the reader and the characters. So
Well, I think it's also really interesting to read this book during the pandemic, where the sense of community and it was very affecting to me to think about people being together,
mhm.
and the strength of community, even when there's a lot of harshness and a kind of a sort of repartee that can seem unkind, and lots of banging of heads, but there's still this thing of being together.
Mhm.
It is a community,
Yeah.
and that was really profound at a moment when people feel like, oh my God, I'm alone on an ice floe in the middle of a polar sea in this moment in time.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's very interesting, I think, to think about that in this moment. Like, I think that perhaps before all of this happened, before COVID, like I don't think that I was that I was aware. I mean, maybe I knew it, and just hadn't articulated it yet, but I feel like, I don't know, that I just wasn't aware of how important, gathering, of how important, like gathering as a family, gathering as a community. I don't know, like how how that too, I think, enables the kind of people that I write about to not only survive but also to thrive. And so
mhm.
I think, like, in this right now, during the pandemic too, I don't know, I think that it that this experience of living through the pandemic so far has, I think it has definitely sort of taught me, like, the importance of that, like the importance of community in this place, and of, of people coming together, and of, and of how that, I think, over the decades, over the centuries, has allowed the kind of people who I write about to, to continue, to survive.
Well, isn't that ultimately the one thing that you can own, which is that sense of connectivity?
Mhm.
um I don't know, to me it was I really respond to books that look at that and look at that quality, and I think it's really interesting to read it at a time when we're feeling that loss so enormous, like a way we've never imagined could happen. Where you can't hug someone or get together in a small group, reading about the strength people get simply from being in each other's presence.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot, like now when I look at the book, like through that prism, like I'm able to see like how that is such a, I don't know, like just a strong element in the book. I mean, like the way, like in Skeeta and Esh's relationship, the way they communicate with each other, that they touch each other, the closeness that they have, like that, the way that they like that, because it's not just physical, but it's also emotional at the same time, and they take place at the same time. And so that enables them to like shore each other up, right? And I think the whole family interacts in that way. And then of course that extends, to the neighborhood, right? Where they're friends, that they, when they come together, that the way that they're able to sort of interact with each other physically and emotionally, like that, that strengthens them, right? That sort of makes them rich in a way that they are not, materially, that they're not,
right.
So yeah, it's sort of, it's sad in that way, right? To like, I don't know, to like look at the book and think about how, how we don't necessarily, we're not able to exercise that. We're not able to draw from that.
Yeah.
Course, I guess. Right?
Yeah. And I should say, I read the book when it first came out, so I didn't read it in this period, but that aspect of it was really powerful for me at the time I read it. It's just rereading it in this moment in time and feeling, and also I think, a theme that I think is really important in it is that sense of dispossession and how meaningful and damaging that is. And that feeling the connection to community is a sense of great possession that feels really rich and rewarding.
Yeah, definitely.
Everybody had a pretty big crush on Big Henry. I just wanted to let you know.
Yeah, he's a very crush-worthy character.
Yeah.
No, yeah. He's I think that combination of like of his physical presence, like he's a very big guy, so it takes up a lot of space, but I guess his awareness of the fact that he's a big guy and he takes up a lot of space, and how he then adjusts the way that he moves through space, and also sort of compensates for, like, I guess, like being big by moving very gently, right? Because he just, because I don't know, I guess because he's aware of the kind of impact that he could have, right? If he decided to, I guess, exercise that size in nefarious ways, right?
Right.
But then instead he chooses to be, gentle, and to sort of, I guess, use that strength, in different ways. I think that's one of the bigger, I think, like that especially, I think, makes him appealing. And also too, with like how gentle he is with Esh, and how full of care he is for her. That is very appealing, especially because, I mean, besides Skeeta, and Skeeta, I guess his ideas about like power and what, I guess how one nurtures another being, they're a little skewed, right? And so but he does care for Esh, and he does, he does, I think, in his way, try to nurture her. But I think that, that Big Henry, sort of his way is more appealing, and I think more in line with what the reader wants for Esh, and their like hopes for her. Like, we want her to be taken care of and regarded and seen in the way that he seems to want to take care of her, in the way that he sees her, in that way that he regards her. So yeah,
yeah. Yeah. I mean, you feel all of the hope you have for Esh, you also channel through him, which I'm feeling guilty because we're taking up so much of your time, but this is such a pleasure. And I think that, I mean, I have a million other questions for you, but I don't want to be a hog. I do want to say, excuse me, that there is a feeling that Esh will endure, that she will be redeemed in some way. Is that your sense of how you left her?
Yes. I mean, I think that through that book, I think that Esh does come to an understanding of what it means to be a girl, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a mother in the world that she inhabits. But I also think that because of the particulars of her experience, of the hurricane, of China, of Skeeta, of all of it, that there's a certain, that she has a certain sense of resolve at the end, that there's a certain strength that she has come into during the novel. I think that strength is paired with a sort of tenderness, I think, and a mindfulness, I think, because she's seen, I don't know, because she's seen how ephemeral life can be, right? And so yeah, I mean, by the end of the book, like, I feel like Esh Esh is going to be okay, I can't, a lot of times readers like ask me, one, they ask me if I'll ever write a sequel, and I always say I don't know. And then two, they always ask me, like, if I have specific ideas about who the characters will be, say, a decade into the future, right? 20 years into the future. And I always disappoint readers because I say that I can't really answer that question because, and this is probably just a failing on my part, but so like, all of my family members, like my sisters, are in their 30s now, right? But for me, they're stuck at like 18 and 15, right? It's something, it's a weird thing on my part. Like, it's hard. Like, my nephew is in his early 20s now. He's stuck at like 14 in my head. And I don't know why. And so I find that with all of my characters, I can imagine them maybe a year after the events of the book take place. Like, I can imagine them sort of clearly, maybe where they are in life from what might happen to them. But anything beyond that, it's hard for me to age them and to sort of forecast into the future and think about where they might be or what might happen to them. But I mean, I guess if I chose to write a book, that follows them into the future, then I would figure that out, like, because I would dedicate myself to diving into that world again and like.
And have you thought about doing a sequel?
Not really. I mean, right now my plate is pretty full. You know, as you said at the beginning of the session, like I'm editing the best American short stories. So that's been taking up a lot of my time. I have a novel in progress. I'm working on the rough draft of it. And it is very different than anything that I've ever written. It's set in New Orleans around in the 1830s, I think in 1835.
Wow.
And it follows an enslaved woman, right? And so that's very different from anything that I've ever written it, and I'm under contract for that book. And then after that book, I'm under contract to actually write a middle grade / YA book that I'm very excited about that.
Whoa.
So my projects, you know, and as I get older, it seems like writing a rough draft and then revising is just taking me longer and longer. I'm getting slower as I age. So, you know, I'm going to be pretty busy for the next 5-6 years accomplishing that. So I don't know what will come after that. I mean, maybe, I don't know, 10-15 years down the line, then I'll decide to return to those characters. I guess it just depends. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think it's sort of a tribute to how strongly people feel about them, that they have this intense yearning to know, okay, well, what happened?
Yeah.
Like, then what? What? Which I think in a way is a wonderful way to leave a book. Because you come to know these characters and they mean a lot to you, and you think, but I want to know, do they find China? What happens to the baby? One
of the things that I love, okay, so I'm going to tell you this, and I probably should not share this, but I'm going to share it. So I've said this before, but I read, you know, really widely. Like, I love YA, I love fantasy, I love sci-fi, I love romance. Like, I read, so all of that, in addition to, you know, just like regular adult, you know, literary fiction, just general fiction. Like, I read a lot. And one of the things that I'm getting to the part that I really haven't shared before, I appreciate fan fiction. Like, I like fan fiction. I like the idea of fan fiction because then I've read some really good fan fiction. And I think that that fan fiction appeals to me because it means that your characters are so compelling, and this world that an author or writer has brought into existence is so compelling that readers, it's almost like they, you know, they have
think
to
of it almost, yeah. And I almost feel like you've created a world that's so real that it's not yours anymore. It belongs to the readers, and they can care, and they've all become writers of the story, which I think is actually very cool.
Right. And that's exactly what I want, you know, what I want readers to do. Like, I want them to decide what happens to China. I want them to decide what happens to Esh and what happens to her baby. And, you know, I don't know, that's very exciting to me, that readers will feel that kind of connection to the characters and to the place, that they would then want to exist in that world and you know, and take up those characters and, you know, and
that's great.
Them. So
that's great. Well, this is going to be a hot tip for page 6. Jesmyn Ward loves fan fiction.
I do. I love it.
I think it's great. I think it's great. And actually, I completely get it. I think it says a lot about how deeply people connect to something. It's very cool. It's great. Well, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this. I feel I really appreciate all the time that you've given, and also just thank you for your work. What a joy to read everything you write. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. It's been an honor. Thank you. I'm so happy, you know, that y'all like I got the edition that you sent in the mail with, like, you know, like the the outline of, you know, read these chapters and you're going to read these pages and read these chapters. Like, this is amazing. I don't know.
It's great, right?
Thank you. It is. It's really great. Like, I love how, I don't know, like it just, I can imagine that, like, doing this again and again, like it really, like a community sort of comes together, and especially at this time, a community comes around art, right? Like, this is what we really need. So thank you for doing that, for making that possible.
Well, it's one of the ways in which the weirdness of the moment has, we've sort of transcended it by the technology that lets us do what we're doing and sharing the books together. And it's really been kind of fantastic.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, stay well, and thank you so much. And from all of us in the club, thanks for this book, and we'll all look forward to contributing our fan fiction.
Okay, good. Thank you. And you please stay well too.
Thank you.
Right.
Thanks.